My name is Emily Carter and I'm 28 years old, and last Monday I opened my banking app to check my savings account and saw that the $350,000 I'd spent 10 years scraping together was gone, completely gone, not a penny left. And when I called my parents to figure out what happened, they admitted they took it all to pay for my sister Ava's over-the-top wedding with a castle venue, and a designer dress, and a 3-week honeymoon in Europe. And they didn't even tell me beforehand, didn't ask me, didn't care that it was my money, my life, my future. They just drained it, like it was theirs to spend. I'm sitting here still shaking from the shock of it all, because that money was everything I'd worked for since I was 18, every late shift, every skipped vacation, every time I said no to a night out with friends, so I could save for a house, a real house, that would be mine. And now it's gone. And my parents think it's fine, because Ava's wedding was apparently more important than anything I've ever done. Let me take you back to how this all started, because you need to understand what that money meant to me and why this betrayal cut so deep. I grew up in a regular middle-class family in a suburb outside Seattle, in a 2-story house that looked like every other house on the block, and my dad Thomas worked as a sales manager at a furniture store, and my mom Susan taught 5th grade at the elementary school down the road. We weren't rich, but we always had food on the table and clothes to wear, and I thought we were a normal family until I started noticing how differently my parents treated me and Ava. I was 16 when I asked my dad for help buying my first car, just something used to get to school, and he told me to get a job. Figure it out yourself, Emily. You're smart. You'll manage. But when Ava turned 16 2 years later, they handed her the keys to a shiny new Jeep Wrangler. No job required, no questions asked. Just, here's your car, sweetheart. That was the pattern my whole life. I had to earn everything, and Ava got it handed to her on a silver platter. My first job was at a coffee shop near our house, steaming milk and wiping counters for minimum wage, and I worked 20 hours a week while keeping my grades up because I knew nobody was going to pay for my college, or my car, or anything else. Every paycheck I got went into a savings account my grandma Ruth set up for me when I was a kid, and she was the one who taught me about money because my parents sure didn't. Grandma Ruth grew up poor, and she'd sit me down and show me how to budget, and she'd say, "Emily, you've got to stand on your own 2 feet. Nobody is going to hand you security, not even your family." And I took that to heart because I saw how Ava got everything, and I got nothing unless I worked for it. Ava never had a job in high school. She was too busy cheerleading and going to parties and getting C's that my parents called her finding herself. But when she crashed her Jeep senior year, they replaced it with another one in a month. No consequences, no questions. When I turned 18, I knew college was on me because my parents sat me down and said they'd saved enough for Ava's education at Washington State. But I'd have to figure out my own way with scholarships or loans, because I was the independent one, and those words hurt like hell. But I didn't let them see me cry. I opened a new bank account at Pacific Northwest Bank, just in my name, or so I thought, because I didn't want my parents anywhere near my money, and I transferred the $8,000 I'd saved from the coffee shop and odd jobs. I went to Seattle Community College because it was cheaper, and I worked full-time as a cashier at a grocery store, then a receptionist at an accounting firm, and I paid my tuition in cash every semester because I saw my classmates drowning in student loans, and I swore that wouldn't be me. I studied accounting because I loved how numbers made sense, how they didn't lie or play favorites, and after 2 years I transferred to the University of Washington, still working, still saving, still saying no to anything that cost money. Living at home those first few college years saved me rent, but it was torture because I'd hear my parents brag about Ava's sorority life and how she was making connections at college while failing half her classes, and they'd still pay for everything. When Ava called asking for money for spring break in Cabo or a new laptop, they'd send it. No hesitation, saying she's building her future, but when I asked for $50 to cover a textbook, my mom would sigh and say, "We're stretched thin, Emily. You know how it is." I moved out at 22 into a tiny studio apartment in Seattle's Fremont neighborhood with a leaky faucet and a mattress on the floor, but it was mine, and I felt free for the first time. I kept my budget tight. 30% of my paycheck went to rent, and bills 60% went to savings, and 10% was for little things like a coffee with a friend or a movie once a month. I lived like I was broke even when I got raises because I had a goal to buy a real house with a backyard and a place to call my own. By 25, I'd finished my accounting degree debt-free and landed a job at a mid-sized firm in Seattle making $65,000 a year, which was more money than I'd ever seen. I didn't change my lifestyle, didn't buy new clothes, didn't go on trips, just kept saving and investing in safe stocks. And by 28, I had $350,000 in my account. That number wasn't just money, it was 10 years of saying no to myself. 10 years of extra shifts and ramen dinners and watching my friends travel the world while I stayed home. It was my future, my security, my proof that I didn't need anyone to hand me anything because I'd built it myself. I never told my parents how much I had because I knew they'd ask questions, and I didn't trust them, not after how they'd always favored Ava. I'd visit for holidays, keep things polite, but when they asked about my job, I'd say, "I'm doing okay," and change the subject. Ava took 6 years to finish her marketing degree because she kept switching majors, and my parents paid for every extra semester, every failed class, every new apartment she wanted. After she graduated, she bounced between jobs, retail here, event planning there, never lasting more than a few months, and my parents kept helping with her rent, her car payments, her credit card bills, calling it, helping her get started. But I saw it for what it was, enabling her to never grow up. By my 28th birthday, I was so close to my house goal, I could picture it, a small craftsman-style place in a quiet Seattle neighborhood, with a porch and a garden, and I was ready to start looking. I had no idea my parents were about to take it all away, not just the money, but the trust I'd stupidly held onto that they cared about me at all. Last Monday started like any other day. I woke up at 6, did my yoga routine, made coffee, and sat down to check my emails before work. There was a notification from Pacific Northwest Bank that said confirmation of funds transfer, and my stomach dropped because I hadn't transferred anything, not in months. I opened the email and it said $120,000 had been moved to an account I didn't recognize at 3:42 the previous afternoon when I was in a meeting at work. My hands were shaking as I logged into my banking app, and it took forever to load each second, making my heart pound harder. When the balance finally showed up, I stared at the screen because it said $4,812.17 instead of $350,000, and I kept refreshing thinking it was a glitch, but it wasn't. My account was empty, drained in a week, and I felt like I couldn't breathe, like someone had punched me in the chest and I was just sitting there gasping. I went to the transaction history, and it was worse than I thought because it wasn't one transfer. It was a bunch of them over 7 days, $60,000 to an account ending in 5231 on Tuesday, 45,000 to another account on Thursday, 85,000 on Friday, and that final 120,000 on Sunday. I called the bank's fraud line right away, my voice shaking so bad I could barely get the words out, and the representative, Karen, was calm, which made me want to scream. Because how could she be calm when my entire life was gone? She said she'd freeze my account and the fraud team would look into it. But then she asked if anyone else had access to my account information or passwords, and I said no, nobody. I've never shared my passwords with anyone. But even as I said it, I remembered something that made my blood run cold. 3 weeks ago, Ava came to my apartment, which was weird because she never visits me. Says my neighborhood's too far from her vibe, and she was acting all chatty, asking about my job, my savings, how much I had tucked away, and I thought she was just being nosy, so I brushed it off. She asked to use my laptop to check her email, and I let her because I was in the shower for like 15 minutes. And when I came back, she was still on it looking at some wedding website. I didn't think anything of it then, but now, sitting there on the phone with the bank, I realized she could have done something installed. Something got my passwords. I don't know. Karen from the bank said the transfers were made from my home IP address with my credentials and the correct answers to my security questions, and I said, that's impossible. I didn't do this, but she said the system showed texts with security codes sent to my phone number, and I checked my messages and there was nothing, no codes, no alerts. I was about to lose it when my phone buzzed with a text from Ava, and it said, "Thanks, Em. You're the best sister ever." And I just sat there staring at it, feeling like the room was spinning because I knew right then she was involved, and I was so angry I could barely see straight. I called my mom first because I couldn't even deal with Ava yet, and when she picked up, I just said, "What did you do to my money?" And she got all quiet, and then said, "We needed to help Ava with her wedding. It's a once-in-a-lifetime thing, Emily, you'll understand when you're older." And I screamed into the phone that it was my money, $350,000, and she said, "We're family, we share resources," and I hung up because I couldn't listen to her anymore. I called my dad next, and he didn't even try to hide it. Just said, "Ava's wedding is important for the whole family's image, and you've got plenty. Emily, you'll save it up again." And I was so shocked I just laughed this bitter, ugly laugh because how could they think this was okay? That's when I knew this wasn't just a mistake. This was a betrayal, planned, thought out, executed without a shred of guilt. And I sat there in my tiny apartment with my coffee gone cold, and I felt everything at once, the shock of seeing that empty balance, the anger at my parents' casual dismissal, the hurt that Ava knew and didn't care, and this cold, clear realization that I had to do something because they weren't going to fix this. They weren't sorry. They thought they had the right to my life. I'm going to tell you what happened next because this isn't the end of my story, it's just the beginning, and I promise you, it gets wilder from here. I was sitting in my apartment with my coffee cold and my heart racing because I'd just found out my parents drained my $350,000 to pay for Ava's ridiculous wedding, and I knew I couldn't just sit there and let them get away with it, because this wasn't just money, it was 10 years of my life, and I was so angry and hurt, but also starting to get this clear, sharp focus that I had to act fast if I wanted any chance of getting it back. I'm going to walk you through what happened next, because the more I dug into this, the worse it got, and the more I realized my family wasn't just careless. They were calculated, and I was about to uncover things that made my stomach turn, but also lit a fire in me to fight back. After hanging up with my dad, I was shaking so bad I could barely hold my phone, but I called the bank again because I needed answers, and I wasn't going to let some automated system or calm customer service rep brush me off. I got transferred to a manager named Steven who sounded like he'd heard every sob story in the book, but I didn't care. I told him my entire savings, $350,000, was gone, and I didn't authorize any of it. And I needed to know how this happened because I'd never shared my passwords or given anyone access to my account. Steven started pulling up my account details, and he said something that made my heart stop, because according to their records, the transfers were all authorized with my credentials from my home IP address, and they had the right answers to my security questions, and even the two-factor authentication codes sent to my phone number. I told him that was impossible because I hadn't gotten any texts with codes, and I hadn't made any transfers, and he said, "Well, Miss Carter, the system shows your phone number was updated 3 weeks ago, and all the codes went to that new number." I felt like I'd been hit by a truck because I hadn't changed my phone number ever, and I realized someone had gotten into my account and changed it, and the only person who'd been near my stuff recently was Ava, when she came over 3 weeks ago pretending to care about my life while poking around my laptop. I asked Steven how someone could change my phone number without me knowing, and he said it was done online with my login and security answers, and I was so mad I almost yelled, because how could the bank let this happen without calling me or checking if it was really me? He kept saying their protocols were followed, and I said, protocols don't mean anything when my life savings is gone. And then he dropped another bomb that made everything so much worse because he said my account had two other authorized users, Thomas and Susan Carter, my parents, and they'd been co-signers since I opened the account at 18. I couldn't believe what I was hearing because I'd opened that account myself. Told the banker I wanted it in my name, only because I didn't trust my parents after how they'd always put Ava first, and I thought I'd made sure they had no access, but Stephen said the records showed they were added as co-signers the day I opened it, and as co-signers they had full legal rights to move money. I felt like the floor was falling out from under me because I remembered that day at the bank. My 18th birthday. My parents driving me there saying they'd help me set up my adult account. And I was so excited I signed a stack of papers without reading every line, and they must have slipped in something to make themselves co-signers, and I was too naive to notice. I told Stephen I never agreed to that, and he said he'd escalate it to their fraud team, but legally co-signers could authorize transfers, and I hung up because I was so overwhelmed I couldn't think straight. I sat there for a minute trying to breathe, and then I grabbed my laptop because I needed to see if Ava had done something to it when she was at my place, and I started checking my browser history. And there it was, searches from 3 weeks ago for how to reset bank passwords and how to bypass two-factor authentication, and I knew it was her, because I'd never looked up anything like that. My email trash folder had deleted messages from the bank about password resets and phone number changes, and I felt so violated because my own sister had hacked into my life and taken everything I'd worked for. I texted Ava right then and said, "I know what you did. You were on my laptop. You helped them steal my money." And her reply came back fast, and it was so smug it made my blood boil because she said, "Relax, Em. It's just family helping family. You're making this a bigger deal than it is." I was done with her excuses, so I drove to my parents' house because I needed to see their faces, hear them admit what they'd done, and the whole 40-minute drive to their suburb I was gripping the steering wheel so tight my hands hurt because I kept replaying their voices. My mom saying we share resources. My dad saying you'll save it up again, like my 10 years of sacrifice meant nothing. When I pulled into their driveway, I saw a brand new white Mercedes with temporary plates parked there, and I knew it was Ava's because she'd been posting about her dream car on Instagram, and I realized some of my money probably paid for that too, and it made me so angry I could barely see straight. I didn't knock. I just used my old key and walked into the living room, where my parents and Ava were sitting with takeout containers and wine glasses like they were having a normal family night. They looked up, and my mom's face went pale, but my dad just leaned back in his chair and said, "Emily, what a surprise." And I didn't waste time. I said, "I know you took my $350,000. I know you're co-signers. I know Ava messed with my laptop. And I want to know why you thought you could steal my life and act like it's fine." Ava rolled her eyes and said, "You're so dramatic. It's not stealing. It's family money." And I wanted to scream, because how could she sit there with her new car and her wedding plans and call my money hers? My mom started talking fast, saying Ava's wedding is a big deal. It's not just for her. It's for all of us to show we're a strong family, and you've always been so good with money, Emily. You'll be fine. But Ava needed this. I looked at my dad, and he nodded like it was the most reasonable thing in the world and said, "We made a decision for the family Ava's marrying into the Brooks family. They're important people, and she needed to look the part." I couldn't believe they were justifying it like my dreams didn't matter, and I said, "You didn't just take my money. You took my trust. You lied to me. You used me." And Ava cut in saying, "Come on, Em, you're single. You've got your job. You don't need all that money sitting there." And I was so shocked I just stared at her because she was acting like I was selfish for wanting what I'd earned. My mom reached for my hand and said, "We're proud of you, Emily. You're so independent, but family helps family." And I pulled away because their words felt like poison, and I said, "I'm not your ATM." And I walked out because I couldn't stand to be in that room another second. I got in my car, and sat there shaking, not crying, just burning with this rage and this clarity that they'd never cared about me, not really. And I knew I had to fight back, not just for the money, but for myself. Because if I let this go, they'd keep taking until I had nothing left. That night, I called my friend Claire Morgan, who works with me at the accounting firm, and she's the only person I trust because she's seen how my family treats me. And when I told her everything, she didn't say, "I'm sorry," or "it'll be okay." She said, "Emily, we're going to get your money back, and we're going to make them pay." And her anger for me gave me this spark of hope that I wasn't alone in this. She told me to come over the next morning, and we'd figure out a plan, and I went to bed that night, not sleeping, just staring at the ceiling, thinking about every time my parents chose Ava over me, and how I'd been blind to believe they'd ever see me as equal. By the time I got to Claire's place, I wasn't just angry anymore. I was ready to do whatever it took to get justice. And that's when things started to get really intense. But I'll save that for what comes next, because this story is far from over. I'm sitting at Claire's kitchen table the morning after that awful confrontation with my parents and Ava, and I'm still so angry I can barely think straight. But Claire's pouring me coffee and saying, "We're going to figure this out." And I'm starting to feel this fire in me because I know I can't let them get away with stealing my $350,000 like it's nothing, and I'm ready to do whatever it takes to get it back, even if it means tearing my family apart because they already tore me apart first. I'm going to tell you what happened next, because this is where things got even crazier, and I started uncovering just how deep this betrayal went, and how my parents and Ava had been playing me for years, and it wasn't just about the money anymore, it was about taking back my life. Claire's the kind of friend who doesn't mess around, and she's in forensic accounting at our firm, so she knows how to dig into financial messes, and she said, "We need to start by getting proof of everything because right now it's my word against my family's, and we need hard evidence to nail them." She told me to bring my laptop to our company's IT guy because if Ava really did mess with it when she was at my place, we might find something, and I was still reeling from the bank, telling me my parents were co-signers on my account, but I grabbed my computer and we headed to the office even though it was Saturday, and I felt like I was running on pure adrenaline. Our IT guy Marcus was there working on some server issue, and when I told him I thought my sister installed something on my laptop to steal my bank info, he didn't even blink, just said, "Let's take a look," and plugged my computer into his system and started running scans that looked like something out of a spy movie. Marcus found it in less than an hour, this nasty piece of software buried deep in my system, and he said it was high-end spyware, the kind companies use to monitor employees or worse, and it was sending every keystroke, every password, every website I visited to a server that he traced back to an IP address registered to Ava's apartment. I was so shocked I just sat there staring at his screen because my sister didn't just use my laptop that one time, she'd been spying on me for weeks, maybe months, and I felt so violated it was like she'd been living inside my life watching every move I made. Marcus said this wasn't something you'd pick up cheap, it cost thousands of dollars, and I realized Ava must have used her own money or worse some of mine to buy it. And that made me even madder because she was spending my savings to steal more of my savings. I asked Marcus to document everything because I knew I'd need it if I was going to take this to court, and he printed out a report that showed the spyware's activity and the exact dates it started right after Ava's visit. Claire looked at the report and said, "This is gold. Emily, this is illegal in Washington state under computer fraud laws, and we're going to use it. But we need more. We need to know how your parents got away with those transfers. Because co-signers or not, the bank shouldn't have let $350,000 vanish without a red flag." We went back to her place, and she started pulling up banking laws on her laptop, while I called the bank again and demanded to speak to someone higher up because Stephen the manager wasn't helping, and I wasn't going to let them hide behind protocols. I got a senior fraud investigator named Lisa who actually listened, and when I told her about the spyware and the unauthorized phone number change, she said that changes things because it suggests fraud beyond just co-signer access, and she'd start a deeper investigation. But then she said something that made my heart sink even further, because the co-signer agreement on my account had an expiration date of 7 years, unless renewed, and it hadn't been renewed, which meant my parents' legal access ended 3 years ago. I was so stunned I almost dropped the phone, because if their co-signer status expired, then every transfer they made was unauthorized, and the bank was liable for letting it happen, and I felt this mix of hope and rage, because maybe I could get my money back, but also, how could the bank be so careless with my life? Lisa said she'd need to verify the account documents, and it'd take a few days, but if the co-signer status was expired, we had a strong case. And I hung up feeling like I was finally getting somewhere, but also terrified, because going after the bank meant going after my parents too, and I wasn't sure I was ready for that fight. Claire saw my face and said, "You don't have a choice. Emily, they stole from you, and they're not sorry. And if you don't fight now, they'll do it again." And I knew she was right, because my parents' words kept echoing in my head. Family money, Ava needed this. Like I was just a resource to be used. I decided I needed more than just the bank's word, so I called a lawyer Claire recommended named Daniel Hayes, who specialized in financial fraud, and I met him at his office downtown the next day, and I brought Marcus's spyware report and every bank statement I could find. Daniel listened to my story and didn't interrupt, and when I was done, he said, "We've got a case here. Emily, the spyware is a felony under federal law, and if the co-signer agreement expired, the bank's negligence makes them liable, but we need to prove your parents knew they no longer had legal access, and that's where things get tricky, because family cases like this get messy fast." I told him I didn't care how messy it got. I wanted my $350,000 back, and I wanted them to face consequences, because they didn't just steal my money, they stole my trust and my future. Daniel said we'd start by sending a demand letter to my parents and the bank, requesting the return of the funds, and if they didn't comply, we'd file a civil suit and possibly criminal charges for the spyware. And I felt this weight lift, because someone was finally taking me seriously. But then Daniel asked me something that made me pause, because he said, "Have you checked your other accounts to make sure they didn't touch anything else?" And I hadn't even thought of that, because I was so focused on the savings account. But I had a small investment portfolio and a secret emergency fund of $50,000 I'd kept in a separate bank. Nobody knew about, not even Claire. I went home that night and logged into those accounts with my heart in my throat, and thank God they were untouched, because I'd never linked them to my main account, and I realized that $50,000 was my lifeline, my safety net. And it gave me this tiny bit of relief, but also made me angrier, because if I hadn't hidden that money, I could have lost everything. I called Claire and told her about the secret account, and she said, "That's your ace in the hole, Emily, don't tell anyone, not even Daniel yet, because we might need it later." And I agreed, because I was starting to see how deep my family's deception went, and I couldn't trust anyone completely. The next day, I got a text from my mom saying we should talk, and I almost ignored it, but I thought maybe they'd come to their senses, so I called her, and she started crying, saying, "We didn't mean to hurt you, Emily. We just wanted Ava to have her dream wedding." And I said, "You didn't hurt me. You destroyed me. You took $350,000 that I earned." And she got quiet, and then said, "We've always supported you too." And I laughed, because it was so absurd after everything they'd done. My dad got on the phone, and his voice was cold, and he said, "You're being selfish, Emily. This was for the family, and if you keep pushing this, you'll regret it." And I hung up, because I was done listening to their lies. That call was the moment I knew there was no going back, no fixing this as a family, and I was ready to fight them with everything I had, because they'd crossed a line I couldn't forgive. And what happened next was the real turning point. But I'll get to that soon, because this story is about to get even more intense. I'm sitting there after that phone call with my parents, where my dad basically threatened me to back off, And I'm just done with their lies because they stole my $350,000 for Ava's ridiculous wedding, and I'm not going to let them scare me into giving up. Because this is my life, my money, my future, and I'm going to fight until I get it back. Even if it means facing them at the one place they think they're untouchable Ava's wedding day. I'm going to walk you through what happened next, because this is where everything came to a head, and I went from being the quiet sister who took their crap to someone who stood up and said enough, and let me tell you, it was messy and intense, but it was the moment I took my power back. The next few days after that call, I was all in on building my case, because Claire and Daniel, my lawyer, kept saying we needed every piece of evidence locked down if we were going to take on my parents and the bank, and I was running on this mix of anger and focus that kept me going, even though I wasn't sleeping. Daniel sent a demand letter to my parents and Pacific Northwest Bank, saying return the $350,000 or we'd sue for fraud and negligence, and he included Marcus's spyware report showing Ava's illegal hacking, and a copy of the original account agreement proving my parents' cosigner status expired 3 years ago. I didn't expect them to just hand the money back, but I thought maybe the letter would shake them, make them realize I wasn't bluffing. But instead, my mom called me crying, saying, "How could you do this to your family? Emily, you're tearing us apart." And my dad got on the line and said, "If you go through with this, you're no daughter of mine." And I hung up because their guilt trips didn't work anymore. I was too far gone for that. Claire had this idea to dig into my family's finances because she said, if they were desperate enough to steal from me, they were probably hiding other problems. And she was right, because she knew a private investigator from a case at work, and we hired her to look into my parents and Ava. The investigator, Sarah, came back with a report that made my jaw drop because my dad had racked up $20,000 in credit card debt from online sports betting, and my mom had been blowing thousands on designer clothes and spa trips they couldn't afford, and Ava was even worse because she'd been living way beyond her means with maxed-out credit cards and no steady job, and her Instagram was all fake, showing this perfect life paid for with my money. Sarah also found out Ava had lied to Liam, her fiancé, and his family, the Brooks saying she'd gotten a big inheritance from our grandparents to explain the wedding money. But our grandparents died years ago and left nothing but a few old photos, and I was so mad because Ava wasn't just stealing from me, she was building a whole lie on my back. Daniel said the financial report was another nail in their coffin because it showed motive they were drowning in debt and saw my savings as their way out, and the inheritance lie gave us leverage to expose Ava to Liam's family, who were big shots in Seattle's tech scene. I knew Ava's wedding was in 2 weeks at this fancy castle venue outside Seattle, and I'd gotten an invitation probably because my parents wanted to keep up appearances, and I decided that was where I'd make my move because they thought they could hide behind their perfect family act, but I was going to show everyone who they really were. Claire and I spent hours planning because we had to be smart about it, and Daniel said we couldn't record my parents admitting anything without their consent, because Washington's a 2-party consent state, but we could confront them publicly with evidence and let their reactions speak for themselves. The week before the wedding, I went back to the bank with Daniel, and we met with their legal team, who were sweating because Lisa, the fraud investigator, had confirmed the cosigner agreement expired, and the bank's system failed to flag it, meaning they were on the hook for letting my parents move $350,000 illegally. The bank offered a settlement of half the money to avoid a lawsuit, but Daniel said no way, we're going for the full amount plus damages because they screwed up, and I wasn't going to let them off easy. I felt this rush of power because for the first time, I wasn't begging, I was demanding, and it was like I was finally seeing myself as someone who deserved better than what my family gave me. I also checked my secret account with $50,000 and it was still safe, and I told Claire about it because I trusted her now, and she said, "That's your backup, Emily. If everything goes wrong, you've still got something," and that gave me the courage to keep pushing forward. The wedding day came, and I was nervous but ready, because I'd spent 10 years playing by my family's rules, and now it was my turn to change the game. I put on a simple black dress, nothing flashy, because I wasn't there to blend in with their fairy tale nonsense, and I brought a folder with copies of the spyware report, the bank documents, and Sarah's financial report, because I wanted everyone to see the truth. When I got to the castle venue, I was shocked, because it was like something out of a movie with white roses everywhere, and a string quartet playing, and all these rich people in suits and dresses milling around, and I realized my money had paid for every bit of it, the chandeliers, the champagne, the whole lie Ava was selling. I saw my parents near the front talking to Liam's dad, Charles Brooks, who owned a tech company, and Ava was in her designer gown, laughing with her bridesmaids, and I felt this cold calm settle over me because they thought they'd won, but they had no idea what was coming. The ceremony started, and I sat in the back watching Ava walk down the aisle and Liam looking at her like she was perfect, and I almost felt bad for him because he didn't know the real her. When they got to the vows, Ava started talking about how Liam's love inspired her to be her best self, and how their future was built on trust, and I couldn't take it anymore, because it was all a lie paid for with my money. I stood up right there in the middle of the ceremony, and my voice was loud and steady, and I said, "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I have something to say about Ava's trust," and everyone turned to look at me, and my mom gasped, and my dad's face went red, but I didn't stop. I held up the folder and said, "Ava and my parents stole $350,000 from my savings account to pay for this wedding, and they did it by hacking my laptop and using expired cosigner rights, and I have proof right here," and the room went dead silent. Charles Brooks stood up and said, "What's this about Emily?" And I walked to the front and handed him the folder and said, "Your son's marrying someone who lied about an inheritance and used stolen money to look like someone she's not, and my parents helped her because they're drowning in debt and saw my savings as their piggy bank." Ava started crying, saying, "It's not true, Emily's lying," but Liam looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time, and Charles opened the folder and started reading, and his face got harder with every page. My dad tried to grab the folder and said, "This is a family matter. We'll handle it privately," but Charles said, "If this is true, it's not just family, it's fraud, and I want answers now." I looked at Ava and said, "You knew. You helped them hack my account. You let them take my future," and she just sobbed and didn't deny it, and that was when I knew I'd won, because the truth was out, and they couldn't hide anymore. I walked out of that ceremony with every eye on me, and I didn't feel small or scared. I felt free, because I'd finally said what I'd held in for years, and I'd shown them I wasn't their doormat anymore. What happened after that was chaos, but it was the kind of chaos that changed everything, and I'll tell you about it next, because this story's not over yet. I'm walking out of Ava's wedding after dropping the truth about my parents and her stealing my $350,000 right in front of everyone, and I'm shaking, but not from fear. It's this wild mix of relief and power because I finally stood up to them and showed the world who they really are, and I'm not the quiet sister who takes their garbage anymore. But the fallout from that moment was like a bomb going off, and I'm going to tell you how it all ended, because this isn't just about getting my money back, it's about finding myself again after my family tried to break me, and let me tell you, it was a long road, but it led me somewhere I never expected. The wedding pretty much fell apart after I handed Charles Brooks that folder because he took Liam and Ava into a side room, and I could hear shouting through the door, and guests were whispering and leaving, and my parents were just standing there looking like their whole world was crumbling, which it was because they'd built it on lies and my money. I didn't stick around to see the rest because I'd done what I came to do, and I drove back to my apartment feeling this strange calm, like I'd shed a weight I'd been carrying my whole life. The next day, Claire called me and said she'd heard from a mutual friend that Liam called off the engagement because Ava admitted she knew about the stolen money, and Charles was furious because his family's name was on the line, and Ava's perfect image was shattered. I felt a little bad for Liam because he didn't know what he was getting into, but Ava made her choices, and I wasn't going to cry for her after what she did to me. A week later, Daniel, my lawyer, got a call from the bank's legal team, and they were ready to settle because the expired cosigner agreement and their failure to catch the unauthorized transfers made them liable, and they knew they'd lose in court. So they offered to return the full $350,000 plus another $75,000 for damages, and I said yes, because I just wanted my money back, and I didn't want to drag this out for years. The bank transferred the funds within days, and I sat there staring at my account balance, feeling this mix of victory and emptiness because I'd won, but it didn't erase what my family did. Daniel also filed a civil suit against my parents and Ava for the spyware and fraud, and we didn't ask for much, just enough to cover legal fees and make them feel the consequences, but they didn't fight it because they had no defense, and the court ordered them to pay $20,000, which they had to borrow, because they were already drowning in debt. I decided not to press criminal charges against Ava for the spyware, even though Daniel said we could, because I didn't want to spend my life tied to her in courtrooms, and I just wanted to move on, but the civil case was enough to make her face reality, and I heard she moved out of Seattle to some small town because nobody in Liam's circle would touch her after the wedding disaster. My parents sold their house to cover their debts and legal costs and moved into a tiny apartment, and my mom sent me a letter saying she was sorry, but it felt hollow because she didn't say it until they got caught. And my dad never apologized, just stopped talking to me altogether, and I was okay with that because I was done chasing their approval. I used the $50,000 from my secret account to put a down payment on a small craftsman house in a quiet Seattle neighborhood, just like I'd always dreamed, and I moved in a month later, and for the first time I felt like I was home, not just in a place, but in myself. The money was back, but the hurt didn't vanish overnight, and I spent weeks feeling this weird mix of anger and sadness because I'd lost my family, not just the money, and even though they'd betrayed me, some part of me still wished things could have been different. Claire suggested I see a therapist, and I started meeting with Dr. Lisa Tran, who helped me unpack everything, and she said I was grieving not just the theft, but the family I thought I had, and that hit me hard because I'd spent my whole life trying to be the good daughter, hoping they'd see me the way they saw Ava. Dr. Tran helped me see that my saving habits, my whole drive to be independent, came from knowing deep down my family wouldn't catch me if I fell, and that realization was painful, but it also set me free because I didn't need them anymore. I'd built my own safety net. Over the next few months, I started making changes because I was tired of living like I had to hoard every penny, and I bought a new couch, not some secondhand thing, and I took my first real vacation, a week in Hawaii with Claire, and I stood on the beach feeling the sun on my face and realized I could enjoy my money without losing who I was. I also started volunteering at a community center teaching financial literacy to young women because I wanted to share what I'd learned the hard way, that your money is your power, and you have to protect it even from the people you love. One of the girls I met there, Maya, was 19 and working 2 jobs to support her little brother, and she reminded me of myself, but stronger somehow because she gave, without expecting anything back, and she taught me that real family isn't about blood, it's about who shows up when you need them. A year after the wedding, I got an email from Liam's sister who said she admired what I did, because it saved Liam from a marriage built on lies, and she told me Ava was trying to start over but struggling, and I didn't feel happy about that. Just neutral, because Ava's life wasn't my problem anymore. I haven't talked to my parents in years now, and I don't know if I ever will because some things break too deep to fix. But I sent flowers when my dad had a health scare last year because I'm not heartless, just done being their doormat. Looking back, I see now that losing that $350,000 was the price I paid to find my worth, because by trying to take everything from me, my family gave me something they never could, the freedom to live for myself. Today I'm 30, and my life isn't perfect, but it's mine, and I'm proud of that because I've got my house, my job, my friends like Claire, who are my real family, and I'm not afraid to say no to anyone who thinks they can take what's mine. If you're watching this, and you've ever had to fight to protect what you've earned, whether it's money or respect, or your own heart, I want you to know you're not alone, and you're stronger than you think. Because the truth is, your greatest weapon. And sometimes it's the only thing that sets you free. If this story hit you hard or you've got your own experience with family or money, share it in the comments because I'd love to hear how you've stood up for yourself. And if you want to follow along for more real talk like this, hit that subscribe button because I'm not going anywhere and I've got more stories to tell.